The day after, understanding what happened yesterday in Israel's elections with Professor Ben-Porat, Chair of the Department of Politics and Government at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev. I'm Ronnie Strongen, your host and Chief Marketing Officer for American Associates Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, known as AABGU. AABGU is committed to the realization of the dream of Israel's founding father and first Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion. He believed that Israel's future lay in the Negev, and today the future of Israel and the future of the Negev lies in Ben-Gurion University. The format of today's webinar is as follows. Professor Ben-Porat will provide his analysis and insights on yesterday's elections for 20 minutes, and then we will begin our question and answer period for another 20 minutes. You can pose your questions at any time by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. For those of you who are participating via Facebook Watch, simply type your questions in the comment section. While we'll try to answer as many questions as possible, the webinar will end promptly at 12:45 Eastern Time. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Ben-Porat, an expert in comparative politics and public policy. He's the chair of the Department of Politics and Government at Ben-Gurion University and the author of several books, including his most recent and award-winning Between State and Synagogue, The Secularization of Contemporary Israel. Professor, what happened yesterday in the Israeli elections?
Thank you for the introduction. I'm not sure yet what happened. I'll try and explain. Let me begin by saying it's the first experience for me talking to a computer, so I might not be very eloquent, but I'll try to do the best that I can. So the elections ended last night at 10 o'clock, and the exit polls were very confusing. So at 10 o'clock, it was still unclear what was going to happen. Is Netanyahu going to continue as a prime minister, or are we going to see change? By around 2 a.m. in the morning, it seemed more clear when the actual votes came in, Netanyahu will probably be the next prime minister. Now we're still at a stage where things are not entirely clear. We know more or less the votes. There are still votes coming in, what we call the double envelopes. These are votes that are by soldiers, by people overseas that have the right to vote, and they'll be counted until tomorrow morning. We'll have the final number of votes in. Now, it's a bit different system than what you're used to. And what's happening in the elections in Israel, we had about 40 parties that competed in these elections. Most of them were irrelevant gimmicks, but about, I'd say, 10 to 12 were relevant parties. Israel has what's called a threshold line. So every party does not cross the threshold line, which is about 3.6% of the vote is simply not counted. So what they do now is they count the votes, determine which parties cross the threshold line, and afterwards, these are the parties that will be in the parliament. At the moment, there are 1 or 2 parties that are close to the threshold line, but after the votes coming in from the soldiers, they might actually be in the parliament. So numbers are still uncertain. What seems quite certain that Netanyahu has a solid majority of about 65 members of the parliament. Out of 120, he needs 61. So 65 is a solid majority. The coalition is likely to be very similar to the one that we had before, which means that Netanyahu will have a coalition of the Likud, that is the greater party, with about 35 seats. You will have the ultra-Orthodox parties with him, another 16, 17 seats, and 1 or 2 right-wing parties. This will bring him to 65 seats in the parliament. This is, in theory, a comfortable majority that he can rule with. There are some caveats, however. We are now going into a coalition negotiation. Netanyahu will negotiate with his potential partners, in which he will have to offer them portfolios, and have to offer them all kinds of demands that they will bring to him. Theoretically, being a large party with so many seats, this is an easy bargaining position. However, due to Netanyahu's very problematic personal position, being under trial, and the fact that there are 5, 6 coalition members, It's going to be an uneasy negotiation, and it might take a few days until we know exactly what government is. Now, trying to understand what happened in these elections, there are several interesting trends that I might talk about. One is the fact that the first time in many years, we have two big parties. So the Likud party and the Blue and White party have about combined 70 seats in the Knesset. This hasn't happened for about 20 years, if I remember correctly. The other parties, no one is above 8 seats in the parliament. So we have two large parties that have 35 seats and about 7 or 8, 9 parties which have about 8 seats. Again, this is a very unique situation, and it could play in very different ways in the coming years. The two large parties, the Blue and White and the Likud party, the campaign was more or less about Netanyahu. The Likud party put Netanyahu in the front, claiming that he should keep on ruling. The other members of the party were overshadowed. They were hardly seen in the election campaign. It was all about Netanyahu. The Blue and White party, of course, tried to do the opposite, claim that Netanyahu is unfit due to his situation and the charges he's facing, and that they could do a better job. In other words, it was not really an ideological, deep ideology that was there. It was very personal for these two parties. The Blue and White party is kind of a strange new making. It's a party made of 3 ex-generals, chiefs of staff, and another politician that tried to make the same changes several years ago, Yair Lapid. They have a platform which is very, very wide. Some would say insignificant that it's so wide. And people within this party come from different backgrounds. Some seem to be very right-wing, some to be more moderate, but they were united in a quest to replace Netanyahu. The Likud party did not even have a platform, never published one. It was all about Netanyahu. So they have about 70 seats in the parliament who were won over what one can describe as a personal debate. Netanyahu, yes or no. The other parties are what we sometimes have as sectorial parties. The ultra-Orthodox, who maintained their power, even a bit gained more than they had. The Labour Party was decimated, which is one of the more interesting developments. This was the founding party of the state. This was Ben-Gurion's party, the party that for 30 years ruled and was dominant. It lost the election in 1977. It since then is on a really, really downhill process. In the last election, they won 24 seats. Now they're down to 6. This party is almost non-existent. Most of their seats, most of their votes went to the Blue and White party. The reason, still hard to explain, but for many people, the Blue and White party seemed like the one that could beat Netanyahu, while the Labour Party seemed like something of the past that has no chance. Meretz party, which is the more left-wing liberal party, is on 4 seats, 1 less than last time. This party also is not able to expand its power beyond a very small liberal, I would say urban, upper class, educated elites. On the right wing, there was a right-wing party that split into 2 parties. One of them was the more traditional party, representing the settlers and the Orthodox, not the ultra, but the Orthodox, the one with the knitted skull cap. This party has won about 6 seats, more of traditional, what we call religious right party. The other party is more interesting. This was an attempt by Naftali Bennett, who was the former education minister, Eilert Shaked, who is the former justice minister. He is religious, she is secular. They're both very strong right-wing. They try to create a party that will kind of break the borders. Religious, secular, united around a right-wing conservative agenda. Bennett, as you may know, is Orthodox, but very liberal. He comes from an elite unit in the military. He comes from the high tech. He speaks in a language that's supposed to appeal also to seculars who are right-wing. Ayelet Shaked is secular. The third one they brought in is Alona Barkat. She used to own a football club, actually my team, and she joined politics, so it's a very interesting party. However, they failed. At the moment, they have not crossed the threshold line. If they will cross it, it'll be just by a thread. So if this party was about to offer something new and convincing, it hasn't been able to do so. So we have now kind of the big picture. We have the two large parties fighting over yes or no Netanyahu. We have the sectoral parties on the right and the left, and we have the Arab parties. The vote among Arab citizens was lower than before. This can be related also to internal developments. There was one big Arab party formed in the last elections to ensure they will pass the threshold line. They broke into two parties. But in last years, there's a very strong delegitimization campaign against Arab citizens held by the right wing. And basically, all major parties said they will not sit in a coalition with the Arab citizens, which could have affected the motivation of the Arabs to go and vote. So Arab citizens are also less represented now. So the coalition seems quite clear. Netanyahu has on the table two options, although one seems very, very remote. One option is to offer the blue and white party to form what he calls a unity government. This has happened in the past. This government will enable him to sustain external pressures. For example, if Trump will bring in a peace plan, which will have any significance, this might cause a right-wing coalition to break. If he has the blue and white party with him, then this could actually enable him to work with a Trump peace plan. However, this government might not stand beside Netanyahu if corruption charges are brought. What's happening now is that Netanyahu, the Attorney General, has decided after he saw the materials from the police to press charges against Netanyahu. But before it goes to court, he has a right of a hearing. So in July, Netanyahu and his lawyers will meet with the Attorney General and try and convince him that he should not press charges, that allegations are false. If the Attorney General is convinced and he can drop the charges. However, if he is not convinced, then this goes into court, which brings a very interesting question into politics. By law, by definition, Netanyahu does not have to quit his position until there is a court verdict, which can go on for years. So even if the Attorney General decides to go on with the charges and go to the court, Netanyahu, by law, does not have to quit. Publicly, however, this is a different story. Publicly, the idea that a prime minister who is facing charges in court will continue in his post and be busy with defending himself in court while managing the state seems to many people unreasonable. A few years ago, when Ehud Olmert, the prime minister, was with a similar situation, Netanyahu came up and said, a prime minister under these charges cannot go on be a prime minister. This was against Olmert. So Netanyahu now is in a very difficult position. So a coalition with the blue and white might be stable externally, but internally, Netanyahu might be concerned that they will not back him if he decides not to quit his post after charges are given to the court. A right-wing coalition, as I said before, might be more difficult to handle. Maybe a coalition with the ultra-Orthodox, maybe a coalition with the more extreme right, maybe a coalition with the Russian party, with Lieberman, who is very anti-Orthodox. It's a lot to handle. And externally, again, if the Trump plan will materialize, this coalition might have a very difficult time holding itself together. So Netanyahu might want the other coalition, but the right-wing coalition seems to promise him to back him up even if charges will be pressed. So in that sense, the feeling is that Netanyahu will go with the right-wing coalition, take the risk that it might not hold, and we will be in the next election in a year or two. but this is a gamble he might be willing to take. What's going to happen now with Netanyahu's government? More of the same will be the safest bet, but things might become more difficult. And let me mention 2 or 3 things. Netanyahu is known as someone who does not want to change status quo. He avoided war. A few weeks ago, we were on the verge of a war in Gaza. Netanyahu avoided this war in Gaza. Netanyahu plays for time, and he shows responsibility, as he says, I will not go to a necessary war. However, nothing is solved. The Gaza Strip is still a bomb. It hasn't exploded yet. It might explode. In the north, with the Hezbollah and Lebanese border, things are also tense, and with Syria. So nothing has been resolved. Netanyahu has shown what some people will call responsibility, others will call it other names, but for the time being, Netanyahu has avoided conflicts. Netanyahu has the strong support of the Trump administration. In the short term, this seems to be working very well. Trump gave Netanyahu the support for annexation of the Golan Heights last week. He gave him the support of Jerusalem, and he seemed in general to be very supportive of Netanyahu. However, as you probably know better than I, this caused a great split within the American politics. So if Israel was a bipartisan issue in years ago, now it seems to be a very partisan issue. If Netanyahu aligns Israel with the Republican Party and with Trump, and if there'll be a political change in the US, this might be a very, very dangerous gamble for Israel. So if the bipartisan election, if the next election in the US will change the government, then Netanyahu's gamble might prove to be a very poor gamble. Although Trump gave Netanyahu support on the Golan Heights, at the same time, he pulled American troops out of Syria. So in essence, while this support could be perceived as essential for some, the fact that Trump has pulled troops out of Syria and left it for the Russians and the Iranians could be another problem that Netanyahu will have to tackle. So combined, I would say that Netanyahu will form the next government, most likely. Will be a coalition together with the right-wing parties and the ultra-Orthodox. However, there are several difficulties lying ahead that might make this coalition's life very, very difficult. What we saw in this election, I think, are 2, one would say, almost contradictory developments. One is the centrism. Maybe you're voting for a large party. So attempts to vote for Netanyahu or for the blue and white was a desire to be part of a big party that will win an election. That is centrism. But there's a contrary development of sectorialism. People still vote for sectorial parties. Ultra-Orthodox, right-wing, left-wing, these are small parties that appeal to a particular ethnicity or religiosity, and they fail to break beyond those boundaries. I mentioned the Bennett Party, the New Right, was another interesting party called Identity Party. The Identity Party was led by a man named Moshe Feiglin, who is religious, who was part of the Likud, and used to challenge Netanyahu from the Likud. He resigned from his own party. This party has a dual agenda. One was legalization of marijuana, and the other was libertarianism. It was a very, very interesting party. It was, on the one hand, he's a religious person, but a very, very economic libertarian, who also supports legalization of marijuana. He received a lot of support from young people. About 2 weeks ago, he was predicted to win 7, 8, even 10 seats in the Knesset. This seemed to be like the new major party of this election. He was able to bring together into this party young religious people and young secular people who shared several things. Disdain for the system, kind of a voting against the system. Demand for less intervention of the state, and maybe a hope for something new. However, when the election came, he won a very small number of votes, did not cross the threshold line. At the end of the day, another attempt to break the boundaries of sectorialism or centralism have failed. What we are left with again is two major parties who are ideologically not very far apart. It was about Netanyahu, yes or no. We have between 6 and 8 parties who are between 4 and 8 seats, who are ideological but sectorial. And we have, of course, the Arab parties. This creates a system which, in the short term, could provide for a stable coalition. In the long term, one might question how realistic this is. I think I'll up here and open up for questions.
Okay, wonderful. Great analysis. Thank you so much, Professor Ben-Porat. I want to remind all of our viewers that you can pose a question by clicking on the icon at the bottom that says Q&A, and then just type your question. I have a couple of questions here. You touched on this, but since there are a couple of questions that are actually on the same, about the same, I wonder if you can speak about it again and perhaps elaborate on the chances. What do you think the chances are to form a coalition between Likud and the blue and white parties versus a more right-winged coalition?
So let's see, I lost my picture a second. Yes, sorry. I think the chances are quite slim at the moment. You know, I might be wrong, and then you'll say I was wrong. But there is among the Israeli public kind of a strong desire for unity government. The Israelis like to have this feeling of unity, that everyone is together, that the left and right are not so far apart, the Jewish people are not split. So there is kind of a general desire, if you will, for this kind of a coalition. However, the reason that I think it will not work is because of a personal issue. Ideologically, the two parties are not too far apart. You can find in the blue and white party ex-Likud members whose opinions on the territories, on the military, on the economy are not different from those of the Likud and vice versa. So ideologically, these two parties are pretty much the same. However, Netanyahu, if I read correctly what he's doing, wants to secure his personal position. And the blue and white party will not commit to siding with Netanyahu in case charges are pressed. Netanyahu is going to have a coalition that will promise him that it will stand beside him even if charges will be pressed. And since the blue and white will not do that, I think he will decline the offer. And it's very much a Netanyahu decision.
Thank you. Next question. How do you expect the new government will affect relations with the neighboring Arab states and with the United States?
With the near Arab states, I'm afraid it'll be more or less the same. Netanyahu's government is not committed to any peace process. Neighboring Arab states, so with Egypt, relations are okay. There's a mutual interest of fighting against ISIS in the southern border. Egyptians have been very helpful in negotiating the ceasefires with Gaza. So Egypt plays, from Israel's perspective, a very positive role. One might say we are lucky that the peace agreement was signed about 4 years ago with Egypt. This is something that we are gaining from until today. The Jordan, not really significant. On the front, on the northern frontier, Syria and Lebanon is a very, very tense issue. I'm not sure it's resolvable at the moment. Now, I think the major question remains the Palestinians, the territories. The question of what's going to happen with, at the moment, 3 million Palestinians who are under Israeli control with no civilian rights, no citizens' rights. Netanyahu did not provide a plan. As long as he has support from the US government, then he can go on with delaying presenting a plan. However, the outcomes depend to a large extent on what the Trump administration will do. if the Trump administration will present a peace plan that will require Israeli shifts of territory, any kinds of compromises, this could destabilize the whole Israeli system. So relations with the US, it's hard to tell. Netanyahu has a very strong relations with Trump. We all have seen that. It remains to be seen whether Trump is interested in promoting a peace process. And again, what's going to happen after Trump administration? If there'll be a change of government in the US, then we're in a whole new situation.
Thank you. And a next question. It seems that the Israeli public isn't concerned about the accusations against Netanyahu. What does this mean? What does this say about Israeli politics, society, and morals?
Good question. It doesn't say good things. I think to a large extent, Israeli public that supports Netanyahu believes either he's a good prime minister, and therefore we should, I wouldn't say ignore, but we should not be too picky about the things he does. He delivers what he needs to deliver. Another set of support comes from a disbelief that Netanyahu is guilty. Netanyahu has been able to create this image of being persecuted by the police, by the Attorney General, a bit odd since he nominated both of them. So the former chief of staff is a religious settler that Netanyahu has nominated. By no means is he a left-wing. He comes from the Secret Service, so doesn't have any left-wing background. The Attorney General used to work with Netanyahu, also a religious person, not a left-wing person. These are two people that have pushed with the charges against Netanyahu. Anyway, he's been able to describe this as a media hype, as persecution, and as fake news, something that you probably know from the US. So the Israeli public either does not believe that Netanyahu is guilty, or will say maybe yes, maybe no, but for the time being, he's the best man on the job and we want to keep him there.
What are the chances of Netanyahu following through on his pledge to annex parts of the West Bank?
That's a gamble. It again depends to a large extent on what the US will do. Annexing parts of the West Bank might cause international chaos for Israel. From the EU, from the US, this might create a big problem with Israel. It will create kind of an apartheid state with Bantustans where Palestinians live under some control and areas that Israel annexes. I don't think it's viable in the long run. But if it will be pushed hard enough from the right side of the party and the right-wing parties, this might happen. Although he had 4 years with a right-wing government and he has not done that. So he had the chance to do it in the past 4 years. Politically, internal politics, he could have done that easily in the last Knesset. Will he do that now? I don't think so, but I could be surprised.
The difference this time around is that he actually said that he would. As one of his campaign promises. He said parts of the West Bank. Do you know what he might have meant by that?
Well, first, campaign promises, as we all know, and statements, we should take them with a pinch of salt. He meant the areas that have Israeli settlements in them and don't have a large Palestinian population. So the idea is to carve up the West Bank into areas where Israel can control easily due to settlements and a limited Palestinian population, and keep outside of Israel the populated areas. So it's kind of having control without having the people. It does not seem to be viable under any international law or norm.
Okay. Another subject. Could you speak about the elections and effect on the Israeli-Arab leverage and changing their status quo? Does it change their status quo at all?
Their status quo has been changing in the past years in different ways. To To begin with, Arab citizens in Israel have not yet enjoyed full equality. Although they have the right to vote, they have formal equality, there are many forms of discrimination that have not been resolved yet. Netanyahu's position, again, at least in his statements, that he's against discrimination, so Arabs should receive their rights. The government has even provided funding for to correct some of the past injustices. However, on representation level, Netanyahu and his followers reject any attempt of the Arabs to define themselves as a national minority. And that's where the question lies. Interestingly, this morning, I talked to some friends. Netanyahu said yesterday he will be a prime minister of all citizens of Israel, Jews and non-Jews. He never said Arabs. He said non-Jews, not Arabs, which is, I think, semantically important. In the recent 2 years, there's been an onslaught on Arab citizenship from the famous nationality law. And even this election, Netanyahu blamed the Blue and White Party that they will sit in coalition with the Arabs. The Blue and White Party said, no, we will not. So basically, both large parties see Arabs as illegitimate partners. That's a worrying trend.
And our next question, is the Labour Party in Israel dead?
Well, needs a resuscitation at least. It's been decimated to 6 seats in the parliament. It seems almost dead. Likud has been also in past years down to, I think, 11 seats, and it came back. So I will not, it's a bit premature to presume death, but it's in a very, very dire situation. The party has been going from bad to worse, with problems with leadership and with problems of finding its destiny and its agenda. They did a pretty good campaign in this election, which seemed to save them. At some point, they seemed to be around the 10 seats or 11 seats, then they fell back to 6. What happened was that the Blue and White Party and the Likud Party both have had a campaign, don't vote for small parties, vote for us. Netanyahu said, if you want to keep me in power, vote Likud, not for small parties. Blue and White said, if you want to defeat Netanyahu, vote for us. The public has voted for the parties, for or against Netanyahu. This came at the expense of the more traditional right and left-wing parties. So the Labour Party has been one of the major victims of this campaign.
Okay, and let's see, we have the next question. The Times of Israel reported that geographically Tel Aviv supported Gantz while Netanyahu took Jerusalem and Beersheba, the city where BGU is located. Can you explain the cultural, political differences in these cities and what it means?
Yes, if you think of in terms of center and periphery. So center in Israel will be more Ashkenazi, more European descended Jews. Periphery will be more Mizrahi, people that came from Muslim countries. So there's an ethnic element there. There's also a class element. Now going back to the Labour Party. The Labour Party is perceived by sons of immigrants from Muslim countries as the party responsible for their equal status in Israeli society. So there's historical memory of discrimination. So many people in the periphery will never vote Labour because of the history of the Labour Party. So Likud enjoys the support of the periphery traditionally for years. Blue and White Party seem to be something similar to the Labour Party. Ashkenazi, upper class generals from the military, from the business. So in the periphery, these people do not seem to have much sympathy, or they have not been able to convince the periphery they will do better for them. So in every election, this is almost a law, if you will, almost a rule of the game. The right wing wins Jerusalem, which is religious and ethnically Mizrahi, and is more right wing. And whatever party is in the center left wins Tel Aviv, which is more secular, Ashkenazi, upper class, So this hasn't changed. Again, the large picture has not changed. So the Likud still wins the periphery, and the Labor or whatever party is in the center to the left wins the Tel Aviv area, wins Haifa, wins the kibbutzim, wins all places where the people are either more Ashkenazi or more upper middle class.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to read these questions. Okay, here's one. It seemed like in Israel, just like here in the US in our last election, that there were some pretty big discrepancies between the polls and the actual results. Do you have any ideas about that and why that would be the case?
I'm not sure there was large discrepancies here. I mean, I saw the picture from months ago that's going to be very difficult for blue and white to form a coalition. If you count the numbers in these months of the polls, it did not seem that that Gantz can form a coalition unless he brings the Arabs in, which he said he would not. There was a theoretical option of a coalition with Arabs supporting from the outside, or a bloc against Netanyahu. That was the most, if you will, from the left side, the most optimistic scenario. The polls are off for several reasons. First, there are some groups difficult to poll. The ultra-Orthodox are difficult to poll. The Arabs are difficult to poll. And also, and this also happened in the last election, people tend to go back to their traditional parties as elections come by. People might say, I will not vote for Netanyahu, I will vote for something else. I will vote for a small party. But when the election come by and we're right at the crunch time, Netanyahu will say, vote for me, or the right wing will lose power, people go back to the Likud. So the polls have missed some of the developments for two main reasons. One is that some populations are difficult to poll, and secondly, because the return to the large parties towards the election. So a month before the election, we see a wider spread of people going here and there. Elections coming closer, people can kind of coalesce around their own parties.
Okay, and I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. What is the majority attitude of the Israeli Arabs toward Israel? Are they afraid to come out publicly in support of Israel?
It's a very complex relation of a national minority. I do work on policing in a minority, so I study how they perceive the police. So on the one hand, there is a political position which at times is hard to compromise. How can we be represented as national minority in a Jewish state? And that's one issue. But also there's a pragmatic issue. Can the Jewish state actually respect our rights on everyday life? So most Arabs, as I understand, see themselves as citizens of Israel. They would, however, like to see a different Israel in which they would live in. But they're not going anywhere. And that's something that we should all be aware of. They're here to stay. They are citizens of the state. And if we alienate them, if we keep them outside politics, outside society, that will not be good for anyone. So I think there is a strong pragmatic attitude within Arab citizens. There is a desire to be part of the state, but at the same time keeping themselves the rights and the identity of national minority.
Okay, and our last question will be a doozy. Is there still support in Israel for a two-state solution?
At the moment, no. And I would say that it was not even on the election ballot. I mean, the two big parties have not discussed that. The small parties have either said no or yes, but they have not had an impact. The support for a two-state solution depends on whether this will be a realistic option. So one could say at the moment, it does not seem to be a possibility. It doesn't seem to be remotely on the agenda. However, if in the near future something changes from the outside, that could be American support for that, from the inside, the occupation will become more costly, then we might see a change of attitude. So at the moment, the support for a two-state solution seems small, although even Netanyahu has said in the past he is for a two-state solution. But it's more a statement than anything else. So a two-state solution could mean different things for different people. For the time being, there is no serious debate of a plan of a two-state solution. This, however, could change. I mean, this is not necessarily a stable position.
Okay. Well, with that, I think we'll conclude today's presentation. I want to extend a huge thank you to you, Professor Guy Ben-Porat, and to all of our attendees. We look forward to your participation in future educational webinars. We're going to be exploring topics ranging from medical breakthroughs to cybersecurity to Jewish mysticism. To learn more about BGU in the Negev and how they are essential to Israel's future, please visit us at www.aabgu.org. Thank you and have a great day. Thank you, Professor, and have a good night. Goodbye, everybody.